I'm Luke Bronin, Mayor of the City of Hartford, and it is such an honor to join Governor Lamont in welcoming you this morning. I want to say a huge thank you to the University of Hartford for hosting us today. And I also want to acknowledge Mayor Cantor and Mayor Wong from West Hartford and Bloomfield, with whom we share this campus. And I want to say thank you to Senator Murphy for pulling us together today. Senator Murphy, you are the single strongest voice for common sense gun laws in the United States Congress, and you are one of the strongest voices for gun safety in this entire country, and we are so proud that you're our senator. Along with Senator Blumenthal and our incredible delegation, a year ago you led the passage of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And the passage of that act and the signing of that law by President Biden was a watershed event. It was a watershed event not because it solved all the problems. We know there's so much work left to do, but because it showed us, after decades of inaction, that progress is possible. It was possible because elected officials had the courage to take that vote, and that was possible because the people in this room built a movement. It happened because students walked out and marched for their lives and kept marching. It happened because moms organized around the country to demand action. It happened because, along with them, groups like Giffords and Brady and Everytown and Sandy Hook Promise came together and built a movement that is stronger than the NRA by far. And of course, it happened because we have a president who promised to break the logjam despite all of our political divides and has delivered on that promise again and again and again. I serve a city that has seen more than its share of gun violence. I've sat in living rooms with people that I know and love in the hours after they've lost a child or their grandchild. As a community, we've been to the funerals and the vigils of a 3-year-old boy who was shot in the back seat of his car, of a 12-year-old girl who was killed while out with friends, of a grandmother who was killed by a bullet through her window while she was making dinner in her apartment, and so many young men. We've seen our police take more illegal guns off the street than ever before, but still feel like they're swimming against the tide because those guns keep coming in, and more of those guns include ghost guns and guns with high-capacity magazines and Glock switches. But we've also seen the power of this movement here in our community, because we've seen people like Brother Carl and our Compass Peace Builders out there saving lives, de-escalating disputes. We've seen groups like Mothers United Against Violence and Hartford Communities That Care helping families to heal and grieve and work with law enforcement instead of seeking revenge. And because of the leadership of Governor Lamont and our legislature, we've seen Connecticut stay at the forefront of common sense gun laws in our country. Just this past week, Governor Lamont signed into law a comprehensive set of reforms that he fought for, that organizations like Connecticut Against Gun Violence organized and fought for. Grassroots organizations coming together to close loopholes on ghost guns, on extended magazines, and so many other things. It included provisions that a coalition of Connecticut mayors worked for, focused on accountability for serious repeat firearm offenders, because so much of the violence in our community is the responsibility of a small number of people. And we know that if we don't have serious consequences for those who break the laws, it doesn't make a difference if those laws are there. I'm so grateful that Connecticut has stayed in the lead. And so no matter why you're here, if you are an advocate or a policymaker or a survivor or a parent who has experienced the loss that no parent should ever have to feel, I hope you know that you have made the progress we're celebrating today possible, and that together we're going to keep that progress going. We are so deeply honored. We're so deeply honored to welcome the President of the United States here this afternoon. We're so honored that all of you are here today. And again, to Senator Murphy, I want to say thank you for showing us why and reminding us why we got to keep the faith no matter how long and narrow that path seems sometimes. And now, over to our great governor, Ned Lamont.
All right, good morning, everybody. You know why we have success here in this state when it comes to reasonable, smart, sane gun control laws? Because of you, because of a movement, because people stand up every day. And you know what you do as a movement? You keep moving. You're never satisfied. There's more we can do to keep you safe, keep our communities safe. And I love the fact that Connecticut is a leader, and we lead. You see what goes on in Washington, what we do here in Connecticut, we can take around the country, thanks to Chris Murphy. I'll just say, this is how laws happen. Starts with you. Starts with folks on the street. Starts with you telling us your stories. It starts with amazing mayors like Luke Bronin, the pain he feels when there's a shooting here. And he tells the story, tells me about how the world has changed in the last 10 years, how we have 10 times more of these illegal ghost guns, plastic guns, guns that's easy to take a pistol and turn it into a machine gun. Many cases our cops are being outgunned. Says we got to do something about that. Reminds us that so many of these crimes are committed by a small group of people. Those are the folks who got to get the illegal guns off the street, and some of those folks off the street as well. And we listen to that, and our friends in the legislature listen to that. We put together a bill that gets passed, and I hope it makes as big a difference as those reforms after Sandy Hook did 10 years ago. We passed on a strong bipartisan basis 10 years ago after that incredible tragedy at Sandy Hook. Laws that made a difference, laws that now, last year, amazing Chris Murphy telling the Connecticut story, telling folks that these laws are making a difference. These laws in Connecticut are keeping people safe here. Look at the number of shootings, the number of murders, the number of suicides are way down in Connecticut compared to those states that are so permissive and having gun on every single street corner. We are much safer for it, and America would be much safer for it. Hopefully Chris Murphy and Dick Blumenthal, our delegation, could take the Connecticut example and take that around the rest of the country. It's a little ironic that Connecticut, for a couple of centuries, was known as the arsenal of democracy. Yeah, we had Colt firearms in Remington and Winchester, and we armed the militias, we armed the armies that fought for freedoms. But increasingly, those are the guns that leaked out on those streets, and those are the guns that no longer were fighting for freedom, but jeopardizing each and every one of you in communities across this state and across this country. So for the state that was once the arsenal of democracy is now the laboratory of change, the laboratory of democracy, making sure that the changes we make here, getting those ghost guns off the street, mental health, all the changes we can make at the national level. And I don't like the excuses from the NRA and others. Governor, it's not about guns, it's about mental health. It's about mental health. We're taking the lead there. We've had the biggest investment in mental health. We have Project Longevity and others going right there, helping out folks at the place where the violence happens, providing them the support that they need going forward, and doing that along with red flag laws, so that next to Adam Lanza will be a red flag. We'll know that somebody's going through severe distress, making it a lot less likely for him to be able to get a gun. And by the way, he won't be able to get that gun under his mom's bed because it'll be in safe storage under lock and key where it belongs. Yeah, then the NRA goes, it's it's not about guns. It's about getting those repeat gun offenders off the street. And look, it's a very small group. A lot of knuckleheads do stupid stuff. Those folks need, they help get them back in the track. But there's a small group that commit 90% of those crimes. And those are the groups that we're going to be very strong about, making sure that we get the illegal guns off the street and we get them off the street as well. And finally, every time you tell me it's not about the guns, it's about the guns. It's about the guns. And we have more damn guns per person in this country than anywhere else on earth. And it shows. And you see that in the nature of the random violence out there, the gang violence, the perpetrated violence, drug-related violence, emotional suicide violence, and we can do so much better. The law we put in place, passed by the legislature, much stricter about getting those ghost guns off the street, much tougher about making it easier for cops to pick up people who are openly carrying those guns and making a difference there. Make a big difference in terms of law and order and safety, and it starts with each and every one of you. I want you to keep the pressure on me. I want you to keep the pressure on the legislature, and we can lead by example, because we know it works. We know what we do works, and I want to take this around the region and around the country. And I can't do it without a better partner than Chris Murphy. All right, Chris, now I'm filibustering because I think you're about to come out on stage. But this guy has taken the lead. He put together a coalition with our delegation, delegations on both sides of the aisle. Where's Chris? He's stepping up every day, making the difference that we need. He's the guy that got it together. He's the guy that got it done in Washington. He's the guy that's going to take our example and take it around the country. Chris Murphy.
Well, good morning. Another round of applause for our great governor, our great mayor, leading the way here in Connecticut. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Well, it is great to see a full house. Thank you all for traveling here. I got the chance to walk around the venue this morning, and I know we have people from all across the country who have joined us here today. And so I want to thank everyone who's with us here in person. I want to thank the thousands of people who are joining us online today for choosing to be part of the National Safer Communities Summit. Today is a really big day, and I just want to take my few minutes kicking off our discussion here to tell you why. First, we have brought together today the entirety of the anti-gun violence movement, and that in and of itself is a big deal. I want to thank all of our participating sponsors. You can see their names on displays throughout the venue. In particular, I want to just thank a few. I want to thank Brady for their decades-long legacy leading this fight. I want to thank all of the student groups and youth groups who are here, like March for Our Lives and Students Demand Action. And finally, this event could not have happened without Everytown, Moms Demand Action, and Giffords. Thank you to all three of those organizations. Those groups, along with me, are underwriting this event today. This summit is a small show of this movement's collective power, and when we work together, we are the strongest, and we should do it more often. Second, today is a big deal because of what we are celebrating. Last year, this month, Congress passed the first major gun safety bill in 30 years, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Now, it's a big deal for a few reasons. First, You know this, the NRA, the gun lobby, fought this bill tooth and nail. Every other gun rights group lobbied hard against it, but it still passed with broad bipartisan support, and that is an outcome that would have been inconceivable just a few years ago. And yes, it's true, there were some Republicans who just finally decided to do the right thing. There were some Republican hearts that softened. But mostly, that outcome a year ago this month was just an exercise in sheer brute political force, right? In the middle of one of the early Senate Republican private meetings on the bill, I'm going to tell you a story about what happened. And I heard this story from my colleagues who were there presenting the early outlines of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act a few weeks before we took a vote on the Senate floor. In the middle of one of those meetings, an unnamed Republican senator stood up and lodged a complaint. And the complaint was basically this, I'm paraphrasing. He said, "Why are you going to make us vote on this bill?" He's talking to the Republican sponsors of the bill. "I can't win either way. If I vote for this, I'm going to get in trouble with the gun lobby. But even worse, if I vote against it, I'm going to get in trouble with all my voters." And listen, that sounds like a simple thing to say, but that wouldn't have been uttered in a meeting like that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago. Because now, for the first time, because of the movement that we have built, it is gun safety voters, not the NRA, who matters most in Washington. And so today we're going to talk about everything else that we still need to do, but we are also going to take a moment, the majority of today, to celebrate what we've done. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act involves 5 major changes in U.S. gun laws. First, it requires more background checks to be performed. Second, it places a waiting period and an enhanced background check on the young buyers of assault rifles. Third, it helps states like Connecticut pass and implement red flag laws. Fourth, it makes gun trafficking a federal crime for the first time. And fifth, it takes guns away from all convicted domestic abusers. In total, this is the most significant package of changes in gun laws in 30 years. Now, that would be a big deal in and of itself, but we didn't stop there. The bill also contains $15 billion in funding for mental health, for school safety, and for community anti-gun violence programs. Now, I know that, like, numbers, it's hard to know what's a big number, what's a small number in Washington speak, but $15 billion is a lot of money. That's going to save a lot of lives all across this country. And I want to pause here for just a minute, because in this room, we have groups who here in Hartford are on the ground doing life-saving work that will be the recipients of this funding. We have in this room Mothers United Against Violence. Give them a big round of applause. Mothers United Against Violence, they are running, they do a lot of work, but one of the things they do is to run compassion circles where victims and relatives of victims can come together and heal. In this room, we have Compass Youth Collaborative. Give them a round of applause. We've got the Compass Youth Collaborative Peace Builders here, and one of the things they do is provide counseling and wraparound services to youth that are at risk of falling into a life of violence. We've got Hartford Communities That Care in the room. Give them a round of applause. They show up at emergency rooms at the homes of grieving families right after a shooting to interrupt potential cycles of violence. And we've got the Brother Carl Hardrick Institute in the room. Give them a round of applause. Carl is an inspirational leader in Hartford, and amongst other tasks, the Institute brings together citizens and law enforcement to try to heal wounds and create new partnerships. Now, that's just an example of the work that we're doing right here in Hartford, one relatively small city, an example of the kind of groups that are being funded as we speak by that bill. And I've got some interesting news, some good news to share with you about what's going on in this country right now. All across the country, data from the first 5 months of 2023 shows that for the first time in a long time, gun violence rates in our biggest cities are falling. Now, it's early days, right? We have seen trends heading in the right direction that don't play out. But if this trend continues, then there is just no way to explain that phenomenon. And it looks like the rates might be falling by over 10% in many places. That's great news. That's great news. There's no way to explain that other than the provisions and funding in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Third and finally, today is a big day because Joe Biden's going to be here. Now, I'll have more to say about President Biden when he arrives, but I just want to be honest with you. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act would not have made it even to first base without Joe Biden. And Joe Biden's not all we got today. You're going to have 3 panels up here that are talking about the implementation of the bill and the future of our movement. We've got great keynote addresses from Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison and some Meriden guy named Miguel Cardona. He'll be here. Gabby Giffords is going to be here. And she's going to be introduced by the best U.S. Senator from Connecticut, Dick Blumenthal. So we got a great lineup here for you today, and I'm so excited you're going to be a part of this. I just want to finish, before turning the podium over to a few friends of mine, I want to finish with a quick story, just to reinforce for you why we do this work. You don't need anybody to preach to you, but let's just talk about why this struggle is worth it. My wife Kathy and my 2 kids Owen and Ryder are here along with my parents. A few years ago, Kathy, Owen, Ryder and I moved our Connecticut home to the south end of Hartford, just south of downtown. Our house is in a neighborhood that has pretty high rates of gun violence in the city. And shortly after we moved in, I reached out to Burr School, which is one of the local public middle schools, and I asked whether we could convene a group of student leaders for me, kind of like an advisory group, a kitchen cabinet of kids who could just tell me what it's like to grow up in this neighborhood that we now live in and tell me how things could change. And so every month I get together with this amazing group of kids and we just talk. And at our first meeting, this was last year, I think, at the beginning of the school year, as you can imagine, these kids were a little shy. Daniel and Kyrene and Mina and the others, they didn't exactly know what to say to a United States senator sitting in their media center. But, after a few minutes, they started to talk. And in that first meeting, they wanted to talk about one thing. They wanted to talk about their walk to and from school. For these kids, school was the safe place. This nation's attention may be captured, understandably, by the mass shootings, in particular, the ones that are in our schools. But for these kids, the most dangerous place is outside their school. Now, last Friday, we met again, and these kids were getting ready for the summer, and the topic turned in Friday's meeting to the difference between the sound of fireworks, which is a frequent occurrence in our neighborhood, and the sound of gunshots. I told them that I hadn't yet been able to distinguish the difference, but these kids knew. They explained to me the distinction, how to know one from the other. And at the end of the discussion, one 8th grade girl said out loud, but kind of under her breath, kind of like she was just saying it to herself, she said, "I shouldn't need to know the difference." Right? And so that is why we fight, right? That is why we don't let failure deter us. The nation's great social change movements, the one that you read about in the history books, they're the ones that are so convinced by the righteousness of their cause that they don't let any obstacle or any setback get in their way. After Sandy Hook, when the modern anti-gun violence movement began, we endured a lot of failure, right? We lost vote after vote in Washington, but we did not quit. We kept organizing, we kept organizing, we kept organizing, right? So that by last summer, we had more volunteers. We had more activists. We had more resources. We were stronger than the gun lobby was. And so, I believe this in our bones. I believe that last summer represented a paradigm shift in the politics surrounding this issue. I believe that the next decade is our decade. Today, we are going to take some time to talk about the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and how we get implementation right. But that bill is just the start. Until we arrive at the moment when no child fears for their life in school or on the walk to school, then our job is not done. Am I right? So thank you all for being here today in Hartford, Connecticut. Thank you for being a part of this movement. I am very, very honored and touched at this point to turn you over to one last speaker with a few helpers before we begin our opening panel. There are some pretty amazing movement leaders out there who are at the same time dealing with incalculable grief and helping to lead a conversation about how we create more loving, safer communities. And so I would like you to welcome to the stage my friends, Nelba Marquez Green, Jimmy Green, and their son, Isaiah.
Good morning. Buenos dias. I took my first formal piano lessons here at the Hart School Community Division as a child almost 40 years ago. My time there didn't last long because the lessons were too expensive for my family. But still, that same girl who couldn't really afford lessons on this stage as a college student played piccolo in the Hart Orchestra. I remember Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the fourth movement, Ode to Joy, like it was yesterday. This is where my husband and I received our degrees, right here on this very stage. And this campus, the campus of the University of Hartford, graciously offered to host the repast after our Anna's homegoing service after she was murdered in the Sandy Hook school shooting. We are steps from where there is a contemplative space, a memorial that reads, "Come thou, Almighty King," dedicated to Anna, Isaiah, and music makers everywhere. But you wouldn't know that because my identity is reduced to 3 words: Sandy Hook Mom. And it's why I almost didn't come. But I came because on May 28th of this year, my son graduated high school and delivered a commencement address. His speech was met with an audible gasp from the audience as he disclosed who he was: survivor of the Sandy Hook shooting and brother of Anna Grace. But Isaiah led us to a great finish. Between that gasp of the audience and the great finish of his speech, listeners were treated to a story of humor, perseverance, and even celebration. Isaiah told attendees many things. It was testimony. The testimony of a young man not defined by tragedy, but absolutely shaped by it. And a reminder to us all of the importance of community. We all deserve community. My ode to joy today would be a gun violence prevention community that uplifts survivors between the gasp and that great finish. It would look like passing laws, but it would also look like taking care of grieving people by providing tangible resources. Both when I practiced at home, I didn't have a clapping audience, so this is really nice. Both of these, the things I said before about taking care of people and passing laws, they require you staying and stay you have. We're not here celebrating the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act because you gave up in the face of hard. We're here because you didn't. After every loss, you still showed up. This morning was hard coming in and seeing all the people against trying to save lives, but you still came and I still came, and I'm grateful I did that. We're here, and thank you to Senator Murphy and everyone who worked so diligently on getting this done. Ending gun violence is a moral imperative and a winnable issue. I also challenge us to not ignore survivor care, because this grief does not go away. Survivors deserve so much more than exploitation and superhero capes. We have transformational gifts and unique voices. Our grief is here and it fills this room, but does not demand we eclipse determination or joy. It calls us to love and should call us to justice. May we strive for respectful engagement and open tables. May we acknowledge the people who have been here long before Sandy Hook, but received a fraction of the world's empathy. And may we make clear that there is no one voice or group that represents all people, but all of us are here, united towards the same goal. In honor of those whose lives ended by gun violence, those injured, witnesses, helpers, and activists we have lost along the way. Will you join me in a short moment of silence? To those in attendance in this room and watching online, I'm a therapist and a former teacher, so you're not leaving here without getting a lesson. Remember I talked to you earlier about Beethoven's Symphony No. 9? It was originally inspired by a German poem, but then in 1907, Henry van Dyke was so moved by that same fourth movement that I played on piccolo here on this stage that he wrote hymnal lyrics, and the final stanza reads as follows. Mortals, join the mighty chorus, which the morning stars began. God's own love is reigning over us, joining people hand in hand. Ever singing, march we onward, victors in the midst of strife. Joyful music leads us sunward in the triumph song of life. Anna and Isaiah's mom thanks you for staying through the gasp until we get our ode to joy and our great finish. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Greg Jackson, the Executive Director of the Community Justice Action Fund.